asteroids, global warming, uncontrollable disease, terrorist attacks, and the threat of nuclear annihilation. All are potential catastrophes that threaten life on Earth. Are these simply disasters that could end our very existence? Or are these threats terrifying prophecies from the Bible's book of Revelation that are at last coming true? Are our fears overblown? Or are the infamous four horsemen of... It is entirely possible that at this moment, somewhere in the an asteroid no bigger than a small building could destroy a city the size of London. A half-mile across could destroy a small country. A larger asteroid could be a tumbling horror of galactic destruction that is almost impossible to imagine. 65 million years ago, an asteroid 6 miles wide hit the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. Its impact threw huge amounts of debris and dust into the atmosphere. The dust cloud obscured the sun's rays. Plant photosynthesis ended. It is estimated that over 60% of the Earth's species vanished from the darkened planet.
There are approximately 700,000 asteroids between Mars and Jupiter, and some of these will eventually come hurtling towards Earth as they have in the past.
Asteroids are only one of many threats to the small planet on which we live. From earthquakes to rising ocean levels, from supervolcanoes to devastating tsunami waves, humans are confronted with forces that could challenge or even end life on Earth. Most scientists view such threats as the random acts of an endlessly changing planet within an endlessly changing universe. But many fundamentalist Christians believe today's threats are unique. For them, recent disasters and the threat of even worse to come are proof that prophecies from the book of Revelation are at last coming true. God will soon eliminate all that is wicked by destroying this world. Could it be that Revelation's four horsemen of the apocalypse have at last begun their fearful ride?
Well, Jesus made plain that the end and increase in these natural disasters.
Then I heard one of the four living creatures in a voice like thunder, "Come." I looked, and there before me was a white horse. Its rider held a bow, and he rode out as a conqueror bent on conquest. Revelation chapter 6, verse 6. The book of Revelation tells us that as Christ opens the first four seals on the scroll of God, he will set loose on the world the infamous riders of doom, the four horsemen of the apocalypse. Each will ride a horse of different color, and each will deliver a series of tribulations and punishments on the unrepentant. The punishments will match the greatest fears of mankind. Although there has historically been disagreement about the exact meaning of each of the four horsemen, the first is generally regarded as the Antichrist. Astride a white horse, this rider's goal is conquest, and his apocalyptic mission
have remained the standard by which modern disasters are measured.
The indicators that the end of days is coming. The signs are certainly present. In recent decades, war has ravaged human society as never before. In the 1990s, over 100 million people died. Civil wars, guerrilla wars, declared and undeclared wars. There are currently 21 different wars raging that kill a human being every 2 minutes.
However, if one looks at indirect deaths due to war, for example, genocide, planned political killing, famine due to war,
to the human race. But in the middle of the 20th century, war took on a new potential
during the same time as our biblical ancestors. And finally, they scrutinized the Bible itself. But to
join the frightening club of nuclear powers, perhaps most disturbing of all, the technology exists for skilled terrorists to create nuclear weapons the size of a suitcase. For some Christians, a specific verse of Scripture predicts that nuclear
that God shall bring against every nation that attacks Jerusalem, that while they yet stand on their feet, their flesh shall be consumed, and their eyes shall melt in their sockets, and their tongue shall melt in their mouth. That's why when a nuclear bomb is dropped, the flesh can be burned off of your body before your corpse can hit the ground. That makes me to believe that there will be a nuclear exchange in the future in the Middle East.
But the horrors of the White Horseman are only the beginning. 3 more riders will gallop from the pages of Revelation to punish the world. Then another horse came out, a fiery red one. Its rider was given power to take peace from the earth and to make men slay each other. To him was given a large sword. Revelation chapter 6, verse 4. Some believe the rider of the red horse will be sent to bring war, but others think this rider will punish the world with the ancient specter of pestilence. In the Middle Ages, people believed that bubonic plague would end the world. Today, even with the triumphs of modern medicine, many are convinced the red horseman is riding again.
The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, I think they've always been in the land. All those old germs that we thought were long gone are still around. And as a matter of fact, in all of human history, we've only eradicated
Flu swept the world with a virulence and speed not seen since the time of the Black Death. In the United States, 650,000 people died, over 200,000 in October 1918 alone. Worldwide, the Spanish flu killed 30 to 40 million people. And just as in Europe in the 14th century, many terrified people thought that the end of days had arrived. Today, it is common to assume that modern medicine can prevent a similar scourge. It is a dangerous assumption. The Center for Disease Control in Atlanta, Georgia, has said that another pandemic is poised to break out of Asia, probably from Chinese farming communities.
What happens is the influenza virus mixes in a chicken, a pig, whatever, and makes a major antigen shifts and emerges as really a brand new virus against which we have no protection. Would the effect be devastating worldwide? Of course it would.
The speed of modern air travel would spread the virus at a much faster rate than the killer flu of 1918.
I'm not convinced we have travel restrictions adequate. Heaven's sakes, the SARS epidemic was started by one doctor in
Humanity placing itself in harm's way.
Care. It has been estimated such a powerful new influenza virus would kill as many as 200 million people, over 1 million in the United States alone. Other global diseases continue to confound modern medicine. AIDS has killed over 20 million people. Almost 40 million are infected with the disease with no effective cure in sight. And the grim list of new diseases without cures is a long one. SARS, the Ebola virus, Legionnaire's disease, Lassa fever, new strains of cholera, all offer staggering new challenges for medical researchers.
It's frightening to think that diseases such as Ebola and SARS have no known cure. No one has developed a vaccine against them, and the only way to deal with them has been quarantine. A disease like that could arise in the
Tuberculosis and polio seem to be morphing into new, more deadly forms.
We underestimate consistently the ability of microorganisms to adapt and change to their environment, even if that's antibiotics. We forget that the stuff of evolution, which is genetic change, applies as much to microbes as it does to macrobes.
Expect aid from a vast network of modern emergency services.
At a fraction of the cost. It has been estimated that 200 pounds of anthrax, the weight, could bring on an epidemic of truly biblical proportions. Scientists believe that even AIDS, or some new strain of flu, cannot bring on the end of the world.
I continue to believe it'll with an apocalyptic plague.
But many do see other apocalyptic horsemen riding through a troubled world. For them, there are signs everywhere that we are getting closer and closer to Armageddon. book of Revelation tells us that Jesus will open the third seal of God's plan to reveal a third horseman of the apocalypse. I looked, and there before me was a black horse. Its rider was holding a pair of scales in his hand. Then I heard what sounded like a voice, saying, "A quart of wheat for a day's wages." Revelation chapter 6, verses 5 and 6.
Catastrophe.
Scripture is a meager wage and suggests hunger and starvation. For the black horseman,
people closer to God because they need that spiritual kind of help to get through a situation. Hope is a very
the
important.
population of over 6 billion is becoming increasingly strained. Over 1 billion people struggle to scratch a living from land that is rapidly drying up. The news media brings us scenes of the ongoing drought in sub-Saharan Africa. But drought is also devastating regions of Central Asia, Latin America, and India. The causes are many: deforestation, overgrazing, bad irrigation practices. Each year, 25,000 square miles of land are being swallowed by desert sand. And the situation is likely to get worse because one overriding fact is threatening the globe. The Earth is getting hotter.
It's hotter now than it's ever been for the last 400,000 years. Not only that, but the worst case forecasts for the next 100 years are that it could be between 7 and 10 degrees Celsius hotter by 2100. We've never seen the Earth heating up at the rate it's heating up at the moment. It's a devastating situation.
Since 1990, the world has experienced the 15 hottest years in recorded history and the 5 hottest since 1997. Most scientists are convinced the burning of fossil fuels is contributing enormously to the problem of global warming. The results are easy to see.
Back for the last several decades. Glacier National Park in the States hasn't got many glaciers anymore, so that'll have to change its name soon.
Flaming rivers.
Is the problem, but in some places, increasing from melting ice is pouring into the North Atlantic, where it meets the warm waters of the Gulf Stream flowing north from the Caribbean. The fresh meltwater now threatens to dilute the Gulf Stream, preventing it from returning to the tropics to be reheated.
So we are probably, before very long, and very long being anywhere from 1 to 20 years, are going to see temperatures start dropping by as much as 10 degrees in the United States and as much as 20 degrees on average in Europe. If temperatures drop as much as we think they might, you will see phenomenon like the Hudson River freezing solid every year, the Chesapeake Bay.
10 disasters which changed the course of Jewish history. The drama begins in the 13th century.
The Gulf Stream. Many predict the climate in this part of the world will become up to 20 degrees colder. Perhaps
Standing in his way is the
Arctic ice caps melt entirely, a very real possibility. Sea levels may increase by a terrifying 30 feet by the end of the century.
And added to that, wave heights are getting higher as well, because we're getting increased storminess in parts of the world.
Every major coastal city in the world, from Boston and Miami to Bombay and Singapore, will lie underwater, and islands throughout the world will disappear entirely. Rising seas that engulf the land would appear to confirm the frightening prophecy of Revelation 16:20. Every island fled away,
and flies.
that can ill afford it. But worse could lie ahead. Demographers say that by the
Animals alike. Next, a raging hailstorm flattens crops and uproots trees. Then the sky darkens with locusts, which devour what vegetation remained in the brutalized landscape.
Actually, we can easily see famine of biblical proportions in the second half of this century. It wouldn't surprise me.
The evidence is very clear. The world is undeniably becoming warmer, perhaps critically warm. The question is what can be done? Many who believe this dramatic climate change was foreseen in the Bible believe that nothing can be done, but others do not accept that this crisis is unavoidable.
I don't think that's the way forward. I think we need to change the way we live. Simple as that.
It seems to me that it's human nature, and wise human nature, to survive. We've learned that we should care about our own survival, and we've learned that we can control a lot about our own survival.
Scientists assure us that better farming and forestation methods can keep desertification in check. They point out that cutting back on fossil fuels will help slow down the alarming rate of global warming. The black horse of Revelation doesn't have to deliver his punishment of famine. However, there are other grave threats to our planet and our lives over which we are helpless. The world. Theologians differ on the meaning and symbol purpose of the fourth. When I heard the voice of the fourth living creature say, "Come," I looked. If the rider on the pale horse is meant to bring death to the world.
Now, as most folks know, frogs lay eggs by the tens of thousands.
Since prehistoric times, humans have gazed with horrifying wonder at the awesome sight of the Earth spewing the force of its molten interior into the air. Romans gave us the word volcano after their god Vulcan, who they believed was pounding his fiery anvil deep within the volcano's fury. And the ancient Hawaiians believed volcanoes were manifestations of the fire goddess Pele. Today, we know a great deal about volcanoes. However, we remain powerless to avoid their awful...
By these insects begin to perish of the anthrax disease. Now, anthrax is characterized by killing vast numbers.
This was a small puff of smoke compared to one of the greatest volcanic blasts in recorded history. That was on August 26, 1883, when the island of Krakatoa in Indonesia blew into pieces.
Mount St. Helens threw out enough material that if you diced it up into a cube, would be about a third of a mile by a third of a mile by a third of a mile. Krakatoa in...
That would be the equivalent of standing in Philadelphia and hearing an explosion in San Francisco. The enormous...
And the ninth, the darkness that shrouded the landscape, could have been due to another frequent feature of the Egyptian environment, a sandstorm. In this case, one of
volcanoes usually comes not from the familiar red-hot lava, but from superheated gases that sweep down from the volcano's opening. Known as a pyroclastic flow, this scalding wind can incinerate people in seconds, undeniably becoming warmer, perhaps critically warm. The question is, what can be done? Many who believe this dramatic climate change was foreseen in the Bible believe that nothing can be done, but others do not accept that this crisis is unavoidable.
I don't think that's the way forward. I think we need to change the way we live. Simple as that.
It seems to me that it's human nature, and wise human nature, to survive. We've learned that we should care about our own survival, and we've learned that we can control a lot about our own survival.
Scientists assure us that better farming and forestation methods can keep desertification in check. They point out that cutting back on fossil fuels will help slow down the alarming rate of global warming. The black horse of Revelation doesn't have to deliver his punishment of famine. However, there are other grave threats to our planet and our lives over which we are helpless. The world. Theologians differ on the meaning and symbol purpose of the fourth. When I heard the voice of the fourth living creature say, "Come," I looked. If if the rider on the pale horse is meant to bring death to the world. Since prehistoric times, humans have gazed with horrifying wonder at the awesome sight of the Earth spewing the force of its molten interior into the air. Romans gave us the word volcano after their god Vulcan, who they believed was pounding his fiery anvil deep within the volcano's fury. And the ancient Hawaiians believed volcanoes were manifestations of the fire goddess Pele. Today, we know a great deal about volcanoes. However, we remain powerless to avoid their awful was a small puff of smoke compared to one of the greatest volcanic blasts in recorded history. That was on August 26, 1883, when the island of Krakatoa in Indonesia blew into pieces.
Mount St. Helens threw out enough material that if you diced it up into a cube, would be about a third of a mile by a third of a mile by a third of a mile. Krakatoa in
That would be the equivalent of standing in Philadelphia and hearing an explosion in San Francisco. The enormous volcanoes usually comes not from the familiar red-hot lava, but from superheated gases that sweep down from the volcano's opening. Known as a pyroclastic flow, this scalding wind can incinerate people in seconds. Mount Pele on the Caribbean island of Martinique erupted, sending ash and pyroclastic gases down onto the city of Saint-Pierre at its base. 29,000 people died in minutes. But even volcanoes like Mount Pele and Krakatoa were small fireworks compared to the awesome force of what science calls supervolcanoes. Yellowstone National Park, most recently nearly 650,000 years ago, and on the island of Sumatra in today's Indonesia. 73,000 years ago, the supervolcano Toba blew open a crater that became to a depth of 3 feet.
Eruptions like Toba and the 3 huge eruptions at Yellowstone over the last 2 million years are in a different league from our everyday common or garden eruptions that we see from one year to the next. The worst thing about these eruptions is that they pump not necessarily as they reflect solar radiation back into space.
Toba's eruption may have been sufficient to cut the amount of sunlight reaching the Earth by 90%. Temperatures around the planet would have dropped by an average of about 10 degrees and as much as 30 degrees at the equator. Today, deep below some point on the Earth's surface, a seismic...
And it's still restless, it's still going up and down, the ground's swelling, there's earthquake activity going on, so there's still magma down there. And the worry is that at some point in the future, that magma's going to come out again. It's done it 3 times in the last 2 million years, the last time about 640,000 years ago. And on the basis of the cyclicity of those 3 events, we could have another super eruption any day now.
If a supervolcano should erupt at Yellowstone, the whole of the central United States would be devastated under a deep covering. Another event of apocalyptic proportions is waiting to happen on a volcano in the Canary Islands. Some say it is an event predicted in the book of Revelation, chapter 8, verse 8. At some point in the future, 1,000 years from now or next week, another eruption will occur. and this enormous mass is going to collapse into the North Atlantic with a thunderous roar.
When it does so, it's going to generate a mass of water, a bulge of water, something like half a mile high. We estimate that the waves, when they hit the US, will be somewhere between 10 and 30 meters high. So you're talking about between 30 and maybe 100 feet high.
When squeezed between bays and river estuaries, this giant wave will become even higher. Any town or city within 20 miles of the coastline of North America could be devastated by this killer wall of water.
The distance between the crest of a tsunami wave and the next crest is hundreds of kilometers. So this water will come in as a wall, and it will just keep coming for about 10 or 15 minutes before it starts to drain out again. So these are devastatingly powerful things.
Today, in the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus' disciples ask him, "What signs will herald the end of the world?" Jesus answers, "And there shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in diverse places. All of these things are the beginning of sorrows." Matthew chapter 24, verses 7 and 8.
Every year there are about 500,000 earthquakes. Most of them are very, very small, so we can't detect them, but there are perhaps 3,000 that are big enough to damage towns or cities. And every year there are 2 great earthquakes. So if they happen next to a city or underneath it, then you're going to get huge casualties.
Most earthquakes happen along lines where 2 tectonic plates rub against each other deep within the Earth. The most dangerous zones are in the Western Pacific, along the coast of North and South America, and along the line. For many Christians, earthquakes are a powerful forecast of the doom and punishment promised in the Bible.
For the prophecy believer, this simply provides further evidence that the Bible is true, that the environmental catastrophes foretold in the Bible were anticipations of developments that we see in our present age.
I have read articles of earthquakes that are escalating in number and escalated in intensity. I believe that there will be earthquakes because the Bible says there are going to be earthquakes.
But most scientists who study, for these observers, natural disasters are no more dangerous than they have ever been. Volcanoes has been on the planet.
They're a normal part of the way the Earth works. Whether you believe that God created the universe and the Earth or not, He created it to work in a particular way, and it's a natural way. These events are completely normal.
But many believe the threats of nature are only some of the signs that tell us that the end of time is near. They are convinced that other prophecies are now coming true. Prophecies that reveal the awful news that Armageddon is almost over. And tyrants, saints, and crackpots. People have been predicting the end of the world since John of Patmos wrote down the book of Revelation in the 1st century.
Signs that are given for the end times. And it's interesting to me that everything that needs to be done before the coming of Christ has been fulfilled.
Jesus said to us, when you see these 10 signs, you are the terminal generation. Lift up your head and rejoice. Your redemption draweth nigh.
One of these signs for believers is found in the 11th chapter of the book of Revelation. The verses say that 2 witnesses will appear to urge humans to repent for their acceptance of the beast or Antichrist. The beast will kill them and leave their bodies in the street, where the Bible says the whole world will view them. For The Bible said it, but for the whole world to see such a scene was impossible until very recently.
Now, in my father's
Are everywhere, and you could see an event like that all over the world.
the ability to say that we can see those two witnesses at one time is proof positive that we are electronically that generation that will see the rapture of the church.
Another piece of scripture that is cited as confirmation that Armageddon is near is found in the book of Daniel, chapter 12, verse 4. Close up the scroll and seal the words of the scroll until the time of the end, when men shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be greatly increased.
When men shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be greatly increased. That literally translates, there will be a knowledge explosion. So we know that the first evidence the terminal generation has arrived on planet Earth is when there is
Biblical references cited to prove Armageddon will soon be here. None is more referred to than a verse from the 66th chapter of Isaiah. Can a country be Many believe this moment that the prophet spoke of has already occurred. The prophecy was at last officially restored.
The resolution of the Committee for Palestine was adopted by 33 votes, 13 against, 10 abstentions. At last, there's going to be a Jewish state.
I was listening to the radio in my home the night we heard that broadcast. I was sitting at the table. My father was a great Bible scholar. He was a man of very few words. And he looked at me with tears in his eyes and he said, this is the most important day of the 20th century because Israel has become a nation again.
Fundamentalists go on to cite other scripture predicting being fulfilled.
I think the Hebrew prophets were extremely clear that the Jewish people would return to this very land in the end days before the final climax of history takes place. And since I've been here reporting in Israel, the percentage of world Jewry living here has gone up from 25% in 1980 to over 40% today. So I believe this is literally going to be fulfilled, and this
come back at any moment. It's not as if there's a whole sequence of events that must happen in order for him to be able to return.
Many evangelical Christians believe that one part of the puzzle of Armageddon is still missing. They are convinced that for the promise of Revelation to begin, the New Testament demands that Jews rebuild their ancient temple in Jerusalem. Their source is in the 11th chapter of Revelation. I was given a reed-like measuring rod and was told, go and measure the temple of God and the altar and count the worshipers there. Many fundamentalist Christians have contributed vast amounts of support and money to Jews in Israel who would make the new temple a reality. There is just one problem. The traditional site of the ancient Jewish temple was on what is today known as the Temple Mount, and on the Temple Mount is the Mosque of the Dome of the Rock, one of Islam's holiest places.
We're overlooking the Temple Mount, where God chose for Solomon to build the first temple, when they came back from Babylonia to build the second temple, and where we hope in the future to build the third temple. There are Christians who support the building of the temple because they believe that this will usher in a certain sequence So God will be in charge, and what will be will be.
What will be may be an explosion of outrage by Muslims. Many in Israel charge that support for rebuilding the ancient Jewish temple risks further.
When Christian fundamentalists encourage and support the tiny Jewish groups that are interested in agitating toward the destruction of the Muslim shrines, you are talking about supporting setting the Middle East in flames.
Still, other Christians solve the problem by suggesting the temple will be rebuilt, not in contemporary times, but during the Antichrist's rule on earth.
I believe he will have the power to impose it on the Jewish people and the Muslims here. He will do the rebuilding. However, I do see the Messiah entering into that building when he comes back.
For almost 2 millennia, people have been still believe this frightening servant of the devil will soon appear. For these believers, signs are all around us that Armageddon is almost here. The face of their religion will soon be joined by another. This one will be the face of deception and evil. The book of Revelation calls this figure the beast, but most of history has known him as the Antichrist.
The early Christians debated over whether Antichrist would be the devil incarnate, just as Christ was God incarnate. But the majority viewpoint that develops is Antichrist will be not the devil incarnate, but the single individual human.
Forms as the Pope, a variety of prominent religious dissidents, Jews, or even Fortunately, most of these reactions have disappeared over the centuries, but the figure of the Antichrist is still anticipated and feared.
Well, the anti means false parallel or opposition. And as Christ was love and holiness and purity,
in some global organizations, such as the United Nations or the European Union.
He will cause a one
to reveal their allegiance to him, their new master.
He will force every person on the planet to take a mark in their right hand or their forehead. Without that mark, they cannot buy nor sell. He will cause himself to be an object of worship.
Revelation says the mark of the beast will be the number 666. Some believe a numerical mark is already being established by the devil in the products we buy and the credit cards we use. When the Antichrist arrives, his mark will already be among the people. Others see the mark of the beast in the barcodes that are attached to our purchases. For believers, these items are seen as marks to guide the Antichrist and the devil to our doors.
I suspect it would be some sort of an economic mark, as many believe, possibly connected to credit cards. We see today that numerical lines are very important. That's what identifies our credit cards. So I think we see the system for this final mark in place today.
In modern times, many figures have been identified as the Antichrist, from Adolf Hitler to Mussolini, from Henry Kissinger to Ronald Reagan.
There were some who argued that Ronald Reagan was the Antichrist on the basis of the fact that each of his three names, Ronald Wilson Reagan, has 6 letters. So from that
planet, while serious, are not capable of destroying the human race. They are not the signs of the end. There are impending solutions to even the most horrifying threats, such as asteroids.
The Earth actually moves through space, its diameter, in just 7 minutes. So if we want to make an asteroid miss, we only have to change its orbit a tiny little bit. If we attach a rocket engine, rocket motor that...
the world and see approaching doom.
I suppose we all have a tendency to see our present moment in history as unique and somehow different from everything that's gone before.
Are we now in a countdown to Armageddon? Perhaps the best prediction of God's timing for the end of our world is to be found in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 24, verse 36.
No one, not the angels in heaven, not the Son himself, but only the Father knows the time.
Most scientists agree that if our world is survival, could be in our hands.
I think we need to change the way that we live our lives. We can't prevent another Krakatoa, we can't prevent another Yellowstone, but we can bring global warming under control. The thing is, if we don't do anything, the situation is going to get worse and
fighting among us. It is we who have set them loose on the world.